It was mid-December, and Hollywood was abuzz with year-end parties and award show preparations. Keanu Reeves, the beloved actor known for his humility and kindness, was walking through the bustling streets of Los Angeles when his assistant, Claire, handed him a plain, unmarked envelope. "This came in the mail today," Claire said, handing it over as they dodged holiday shoppers. "No return address. Just your name written in the neatest handwriting I've ever seen." Keanu opened it carefully, his brow furrowing as he read. The letter was from a 14-year-old boy named Elijah. It was heartfelt, written on lined notebook paper. "Dear Mr. Reeves. My great-grandfather lives in a place called Freedom House, a home for elderly African-American veterans. He's 96 years old and says you're his favorite actor. They don't get many visitors there, especially around the holidays. I know you're busy, but if you could come by and say hi, it would mean so much to him and the other veterans. They all have stories, just like the ones you tell in your movies. Sincerely, Elijah." Keanu stopped in his tracks, reading the letter again. Claire, seeing the look on his face, asked, "Something wrong?" "Not at all," Keanu replied, his signature calm demeanor softening into a rare smile. "But I think I know where I need to be before the new year." What Keanu didn't realize was that this simple letter would take him on a journey filled with heartwarming surprises, unexpected connections, and a mission he never anticipated. Keanu didn't waste any time. That same evening, he had Claire tracked down the address for Freedom House. Located in a quiet suburb outside of Atlanta, Georgia, the home was far from the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. The facility was modest, largely supported by donations, and served as a safe haven for African American veterans who had once fought valiantly for their country but had been left behind by time. "I'll clear your schedule," Claire offered when Keanu told her of his plans. "No need," Keanu said with a grin. "I don't think anyone's expecting me to turn up at New Year's parties anyway." With a duffel bag packed and Elijah's letter folded neatly into his coat pocket, Keanu boarded an early flight to Atlanta the next morning. The other passengers, initially starstruck to see him in coach class, quickly realized that Keanu wasn't there for attention. Instead, he spent most of the flight flipping through a notebook where he jotted down notes about veterans' issues, history, and even a few motivational quotes he thought might resonate with the group. Once he landed in Atlanta, Keanu rented a modest sedan, nothing flashy, just something to get him where he needed to go. As he drove through the winding roads leading to Freedom House, he passed through neighborhoods decked out in holiday lights and bustling with New Year's Eve preparations. A faint wave of doubt crept in. Would they even want a visit from a Hollywood actor? When he finally pulled up to the unassuming brick building that housed Freedom House, he took a deep breath. There was no red carpet, no fanfare, just a wooden sign near the entrance that read, "Freedom House, honoring those who served with dignity." He walked up to the door, clutching a small bag of books and DVDs he'd brought as gifts. Before he could knock, a voice startled him. "Hey there. You look like you're lost, mister." Keanu turned to see an elderly man sitting in a wheelchair near the entrance. He wore a military cap adorned with pins and had a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," Keanu said with a warm smile. The man laughed heartily. "Well, I'll be. You're John Wick, ain't ya? Or Neo, or whoever you want to be today." Keanu chuckled, crouching down to meet the man's gaze. "Actually, I'm just Keanu. And I was hoping I could come in and meet some of you heroes." The man wheeled himself closer, extending a hand. "Name's Sergeant Louis Jefferson, but you can call me Lou. You're about to make some folks in there real happy, son." Little did Keanu know, his arrival was about to set off a chain of unexpected events that would touch lives far beyond the walls of Freedom House. The entrance to Freedom House opened with a creak as Sergeant Lou pushed the door wide, motioning for Keanu to step inside. "Come on in, son," he said with a grin. "We don't bite, most of us, anyway." Keanu followed, taking in the atmosphere. The home was simple but filled with a warmth that only came from a shared history. The walls were adorned with faded photographs of men and women in uniform, some smiling proudly, others posed stoically in black and white portraits from decades past. A large bulletin board near the entrance was covered in hand-drawn cards from local schoolchildren, many of them wishing the veterans a happy holiday season. "Hey, everyone!" Lou called out, his voice booming with a strength that belied his age. "We've got ourselves a celebrity visitor." The common area was spacious but sparsely decorated, save for a modest Christmas tree in the corner, its ornaments mismatched but clearly cherished. Several veterans, who had been sitting around chatting or playing dominoes, turned their heads in curiosity. "Who is it, Lou?" "Not another politician, I hope," a voice called from across the room. "Nope," Lou replied, wheeling himself forward. "It's Keanu Reeves, the movie star." A murmur rippled through the room, followed by a wave of surprised exclamations. "The Matrix guy? John Wick?" "Nah, you're pullin' my leg, Lou." "Well, I'll be darned." Keanu stepped forward, his characteristic humility on full display. "Hi, everyone," he said, offering a small wave. "I'm just here to spend some time with you all, if that's okay." For a moment, there was silence. Then an elderly woman with a walker shuffled forward, her eyes narrowing as she inspected him. "Well, I'll be." "It is him," she declared, her face breaking into a wide smile. "You're a lot taller in person." The room erupted in laughter, and the ice was broken. One by one, the veterans began to approach him, some offering firm handshakes, others clapping him on the shoulder. Keanu listened intently as they introduced themselves, each sharing a snippet of their story, where they had served, how long they'd been at Freedom House, or what had brought them there. "I wasn't expecting a celebrity to show up today," said a man named Frank, a retired Navy medic. "You sure you're not lost?" Keanu chuckled. "I got a letter from someone very special," he explained, pulling Elijah's note from his coat pocket. "His great-grandfather lives here, and he said this place was full of heroes. How could I not come and meet you all?" As he spoke, the staff began to gather as well, their faces lighting up as they realized who their guest was. "Mr. Reeves," said a nurse named Angela, "this is such an incredible surprise. The residents here are going to talk about this for weeks." "I hope so," Keanu replied sincerely. "But I'd like to do more than just visit. If it's all right, I'd like to spend the day here, maybe hear some stories, share some of my own, and see if there's anything I can do to help." Angela looked at him, slightly stunned. You want to spend the whole day here?" "Longer, if you'll have me," Keanu said with a smile. Just then, Lou piped up. "Well, if you're sticking around, I hope you're ready to hear some tall tales. These folks love to embellish." "That's perfect," Keanu replied. "I love a good story." But as the day unfolded, Keanu would learn that these weren't just tall tales, they were powerful, untold histories that would change his perspective forever. Keanu found himself sitting in a circle of veterans in the common area of Freedom House, surrounded by a patchwork of old uniforms, faded medals, and a lifetime's worth of memories. As Lou predicted, the stories began to flow, but to Keanu's surprise, they weren't tall tales at all. Each story was a glimpse into a life filled with sacrifice, courage, and resilience. One of the first veterans to speak was Mrs. Ruby "Red" Henderson, a former Army nurse who had served in World War II. "Back then, they didn't expect much of us women," she said, her voice sharp and clear despite her 98 years. "But let me tell you something, young man. I wasn't about to let my boys die without a fight. I patched them up with nothing but scraps and prayers when the supplies ran dry." Keanu listened with rapt attention as Ruby recounted how she had worked tirelessly under enemy fire, her courage earning her the nickname Red Lion among the soldiers she cared for. "You're a real-life hero," Keanu said when she finished, his admiration evident. "Hero?" Ruby scoffed, though there was a twinkle in her eye. "I just did my job." You're the one dodging bullets in your movies for the big bucks. The group erupted in laughter, and Keanu couldn't help but laugh along with them. But the levity soon gave way to a more somber moment as another veteran, Mr. Walter "Wally" Jenkins, began to speak. Wally, who had served in the Korean War, leaned forward in his chair, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched a worn photo of a younger version of himself in uniform. You know, he began, his voice low, back in the 50s, we fought 2 wars, one overseas and one right here at home. Didn't matter that I wore this uniform or risked my life. When I came back, they still wouldn't serve me at the diner I used to go to as a kid. The room grew quiet, the weight of Wally's words settling over everyone. Keanu nodded solemnly, his face reflecting the deep respect he felt for the man. I can't imagine what that must have been like, Keanu said softly. But what you did, it mattered. It still matters. Wally gave a small smile, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Thanks, son. That means a lot coming from someone like you. The stories continued, each one more powerful than the last. There was Franklin, a Vietnam veteran who had survived being a prisoner of war, Clara, who had been one of the first black women to join the Air Force, and James, a Desert Storm veteran who had dedicated his post-service life to mentoring at-risk youth. Throughout it all, Keanu did what he did best, he listened. Not just with his ears, but with his whole being. He asked thoughtful questions, laughed at their jokes, and offered words of encouragement when emotions ran high. At one point, Lou leaned over to Keanu and said, "You know, I wasn't kidding when I said these folks embellish. But there's one story here that's the God's honest truth, and it's the wildest of them all. You ought to talk to Calvin. He's the quiet one in the corner over there." Keanu glanced toward the far side of the room, where an elderly man sat by himself, gazing out the window. Calvin looked to be in his late 80s, his thin frame wrapped in a worn military jacket that hung loosely on his shoulders. There was something about him, an air of quiet strength, mixed with a hint of sadness. "What's his story?" Keanu asked Lou. "Oh, I could tell you," Lou replied with a chuckle, "but it wouldn't do it justice. You're gonna have to hear it from the man himself." Intrigued, Keanu stood and made his way over to Calvin. "Mind if I join you?" he asked gently. Calvin turned, his dark eyes sharp despite his age. "Depends," he said after a moment. "Are you here to listen, or just to talk?" "I'm here to listen," Keanu replied without hesitation. Calvin studied him for a long moment before nodding toward the chair beside him. "All right then. Sit down. I'll tell you about the day I met Dr. King." Keanu blinked in surprise but quickly composed himself. As he settled into the chair, he realized that this was no ordinary visit. He wasn't just here to give back, he was here to learn, to grow, and to carry these stories forward. What he didn't know was that Calvin's tale would lead to an unexpected twist that would leave everyone in the room speechless. The room seemed to shrink as Calvin began to speak. His voice, deep and steady, carried the weight of decades of reflection. "It was 1965, Calvin began, his gaze drifting back toward the window as if he could see the past playing out before him. I had just come back from serving in Korea. Still wore my uniform most days, partly because I was proud, but mostly because it was the only good set of clothes I had. Times were different back then, you understand." Keanu nodded, leaning in slightly. The other veterans, sensing the importance of what Calvin was about to share, began to gather around quietly, forming an unspoken circle of respect. "Back then, the South was still fightin' its own war," Calvin continued. "Not the kind with guns and tanks, but the kind that cuts just as deep. I was in Selma, Alabama, working as a delivery driver for a local store. One day, I heard about a march. A big one. Folks were saying Dr. King was gonna be there, marching for voting rights. I didn't think much of it at first, I was just trying to keep my head down, stay out of trouble." Calvin paused, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "But my mama, she had other plans. "Calvin Eugene Turner," she said to me, "you fought for freedom overseas, now it's time you fight for it here." And when my mama spoke, there wasn't much arguing to be done. The group chuckled softly, but the air remained charged with anticipation. "So I went," Calvin said simply. "Didn't know what to expect, didn't know what I'd say or do. But I showed up. There were so many people there, young, old, black, white. And in the middle of it all was Dr. King. He had this way about him, like he could see straight into your soul. When he spoke, you felt like you were part of something bigger than yourself." Calvin's voice grew quieter, his hands clasped tightly together. "We marched. We walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, shoulder to shoulder, singing and praying. And then, he stopped, his jaw tightening as he glanced at the veterans around him. Well, you all know what happened next." Lou nodded solemnly. "The police attacked them," he explained for Keanu's benefit. "Tear gas, clubs, you name it. They didn't care who they hurt." Keanu's heart clenched as he imagined the scene, peaceful marchers being brutalized for daring to demand basic human rights. "Were you hurt?" he asked softly. Calvin exhaled slowly. "I was lucky. Got a few bruises, but nothing compared to what some of the others went through. But that day changed me. It showed me that the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. So I stayed involved. I kept marching, kept speaking out, even when it cost me jobs, friends, even family. But I don't regret a second of it." The room was silent for a long moment, the weight of Calvin's words settling over everyone. Then, to Keanu's surprise, Calvin reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled photograph. "This here," he said, holding it up, "is from that day. That's me, standing right there behind Dr. King." Keanu took the photo carefully, studying it. The image, though faded and worn, was powerful. Calvin, young and strong in his uniform, stood proudly behind Dr. King, his face a mixture of determination and hope. "This is incredible," Keanu said, his voice filled with awe. "You were part of history." Calvin chuckled softly. "History don't always feel so grand when you're living it. But looking back, yeah, I suppose I was." Just then, a younger staff member who had been listening from the doorway stepped forward. "Mr. Turner," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "you never told us any of this. Why didn't you share your story before?" Calvin shrugged, a faint smile on his lips. "Didn't think it mattered much. Just did what I had to do, like everybody else." "It matters," Keanu said firmly, his voice steady. "It matters more than you know." The staff member wiped at her eyes and suddenly had an idea. "You know," she said, "we've been trying to put together a little history project for Freedom House, something to honor the lives and legacies of everyone here. Mr. Reeves, maybe you could help us?" Keanu blinked, caught off guard. "Me? How?" "Well," she said, glancing around the room, "you're a storyteller, right? And these folks have some amazing stories to tell. Maybe we could work together to record them, make sure they're preserved for future generations." The veterans murmured in agreement, nodding their heads. Calvin, however, raised an eyebrow. "You think people want to hear stories from a bunch of old folks like us?" Keanu turned to him, his voice filled with conviction. "I don't think, I know they do. Your stories are part of what makes this country what it is. They deserve to be told." As the idea began to take shape, Keanu realized that what had started as a simple visit was turning into something much bigger. He wasn't just here to listen, he was here to help ensure these heroes' voices would never be forgotten. What he didn't know was that this project would lead to one of the most unexpected surprises of his career. The room buzzed with excitement as the idea of a storytelling project began to take root. Veterans leaned toward one another, exchanging knowing glances and murmuring about the moments they'd like to share. Keanu could feel the energy shift, there was a spark of renewed purpose in the air, a sense of pride that had been dormant but was now awakening. Angela, the nurse who had first greeted Keanu, returned with a notepad in hand. "We've been talking about this for years," she explained, flipping through a few blank pages. "But we've never had the time or resources to make it happen. Mr. Reeves, if you're serious about this, maybe you could help us find a way to fund it." Keanu held up a hand. "First of all, call me Keanu. Second of all, I'll do more than help. I'll take care of it. Whatever it takes to get this project off the ground, I'm in." Angela blinked, momentarily stunned. "You're serious?" "Completely," Keanu replied. "But we're not just going to focus on the big, flashy stories. We're going to capture everything, the quiet moments, the challenges, the victories, the wisdom. All of it matters." Lou, ever the joker, chimed in. "Well, if you're paying, I guess I can find a thing or two to say," he said, grinning. "But you better make sure the camera gets my good side." The group laughed, and Keanu couldn't help but grin. "Deal," he said, shaking Lou's hand for emphasis. But Calvin, who had been quiet since sharing his story, suddenly spoke up. "It's a nice idea," he said, his voice measured, "but ideas don't mean much without action. How do we know this isn't just talk?" The room fell silent, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. Keanu met Calvin's gaze, his expression steady. "You're right," he said after a moment. "Words aren't enough. So let's start now. Right here, right now." "What do you mean?" Calvin asked, narrowing his eyes. Keanu stood and gestured toward the group. "Let's record the first story today. If you're willing to go first, I'll set up my phone and start filming. We'll use it as a starting point for the whole project. What do you say?" The veterans murmured in approval, their faces lighting up with anticipation. Calvin leaned back in his chair, studying Keanu carefully. Finally, a slow smile spread across his face. "All right, Hollywood," he said. "Let's see what you've got." Within minutes, Angela had set up a makeshift stage in the common area, complete with a chair and a small spotlight borrowed from the activity room. Keanu propped up his phone on a tripod he carried in his bag, a habit from his own travels, and the group gathered around, forming an impromptu audience. Calvin took his seat in the spotlight, his military jacket freshly smoothed and his medals glinting faintly in the light. Despite his earlier confidence, he looked slightly nervous as he glanced at the phone camera. "This thing on?" he asked, tapping his finger near the lens. Keanu stepped forward, crouching beside him. "Don't think of it as a camera," he said gently. "Think of it as a friend who's here to listen." Calvin nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. When he began to speak, his voice was strong and clear. "My name is Calvin Eugene Turner," he said, his words deliberate, "and I've got a story to tell." For nearly an hour, Calvin spoke about his life, his childhood in the segregated South, his time in the military, and his journey as a civil rights activist. He shared moments of triumph and heartbreak, peppered with humor and wisdom that only someone who had lived through history could offer. The room was spellbound. Even the staff, who had heard bits and pieces of these stories before, stood silently in the back, their eyes glistening with emotion. When Calvin finally finished, there was a long moment of silence before the room erupted into applause. Keanu stepped forward, shaking Calvin's hand. "That was incredible," he said. "Thank you for trusting us with your story." Calvin smiled, but his expression was thoughtful. "You know," he said, glancing at the veterans around him, "I wasn't sure about this at first. But maybe it's time we let the world see us for who we really are." Keanu nodded, his voice steady. "It's more than time." As the group celebrated the success of Calvin's recording, Angela approached Keanu with a clipboard. "We're going to need more than just a phone for this," she said, her tone half apologetic. "Professional equipment, an editor, maybe even a small team." Keanu smiled. "I'll make some calls." I've got a few friends who owe me favors. Angela raised an eyebrow. Hollywood friends? Not just Hollywood, Keanu replied with a wink. But don't worry, I'll handle it. What Keanu didn't say, however, was that he already had someone in mind for the job. Someone who would bring an unexpected twist to the project, and who would arrive sooner than anyone expected. As the evening wore on, the veterans began to disperse, some heading to their rooms while others lingered in small groups, still buzzing from the day's events. Keanu stayed behind to help clean up, chatting with Angela and the staff as they put away chairs and tidied the common area. "Thank you for today," Angela said quietly as they worked. "I think you've given them something they didn't even know they needed." Keanu shook his head. "They've given me something. This isn't just their history, it's our history. And I'm honored to be part of it." Angela smiled, but before she could respond, the front door of Freedom House opened with a faint creak. A young boy stepped inside, clutching a backpack that looked almost as big as he was. His face lit up when he spotted Keanu. "Elijah!" Keanu exclaimed, recognizing him immediately. "I told my mom I had to come," Elijah said breathlessly, running up to him. "She said it was okay as long as I behaved." "Did you meet my great-grandpa? Did he tell you his story?" Keanu crouched down, meeting Elijah at eye level. "I did," he said with a warm smile. "And you were right, your great-grandpa is amazing. Just like the rest of the heroes here." Elijah beamed, but before he could say more, Calvin appeared in the doorway to the common room. "Elijah," he called, his face breaking into a wide grin. "What are you doing here, boy?" "I wanted to see you, Grandpa," Elijah said, running to hug him. As Calvin embraced his great-grandson, Keanu felt a lump rise in his throat. This moment, this connection between generations, was exactly what the project was about. And as he watched the two of them, an idea began to form in his mind. He didn't know it yet, but Elijah's involvement would soon take this project in a direction no one could have anticipated. As the evening settled over Freedom House, Elijah sat on his great-grandfather Calvin's lap, the two of them laughing quietly about an old family story Calvin was recounting. The sight was heartwarming, a bridge between generations, one that seemed to renew Calvin's spirit. Keanu, watching the interaction from across the room, couldn't help but smile. He'd come here expecting to visit some veterans, but what he'd found was a living tapestry of history and connection. "Hey, Mr. Reeves." Elijah piped up suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet murmur of the room. Keanu turned, chuckling at the boy's formality. "Elijah, you can just call me Keanu," he said, walking over. "What's up?" Elijah leaned forward, his small face lighting up with excitement. "You said you were going to help with my great-grandpa's story, right?" Keanu nodded. "That's right. And not just his, everyone's. We're going to make sure the world hears what happened here." "Well," Elijah said, gripping the straps of his backpack, "what if we did more than just tell their stories? What if we made a movie? You make movies all the time, right? Why not make one about all of them?" The room, which had been quiet, suddenly erupted in chatter. "A movie? Now that's ambitious." "Well, if anyone can pull it off, it's Keanu Reeves." Keanu blinked, caught off guard by the suggestion. He crouched down to meet Elijah's eye level. "That's a big idea," he said thoughtfully. "Making a movie takes a lot of time, a lot of people, and a lot of money. But I like the way you think." Calvin, who had been listening quietly, chuckled. "This boy's been dreaming big since he was old enough to talk," he said, ruffling Elijah's hair. "But he's got a point. If Hollywood's gonna make movies about us, they might as well get it right." Angela, who had overheard, stepped forward with a curious expression. "Actually, a movie might not be as impossible as it sounds," she said. "What if we started with a short documentary? We could work with a small production crew, interview everyone here, and release it online for people to see." Lou, ever the joker, waved his hand. Long as you don't make me wear makeup, I'm in. The room laughed, and Keanu, now fully invested, stood up and addressed the group. All right, let's do it, he said, his voice filled with determination. We'll start with a documentary, a way to honor everyone here and share your stories with the world. I'll call in some friends to help with the technical side, and we'll figure out the rest as we go. How does that sound? The veterans erupted into cheers and applause, their excitement palpable. Elijah's grin stretched from ear to ear. This is gonna be awesome, he exclaimed. The next morning, Keanu wasted no time. He spent the night drafting ideas for the project, scribbling notes in a small notebook he kept in his duffel bag. By morning, he had a plan, simple but effective. At breakfast, he gathered the veterans and staff around a long table in the dining hall. Okay, he began, holding up his notebook, here's what we're going to do. Over the next few weeks, we'll interview everyone who wants to participate. We'll film your stories, gather old photos and memorabilia, and create something that captures the heart of what Freedom House is all about. Angela raised her hand like she was in a classroom. Who's going to do the filming? Are you going to call a professional production company? Keanu smiled. I've got someone in mind. A friend of mine, Marcus, is a documentary filmmaker. He specializes in telling stories that matter, and I think this will be right up his alley. Marcus? Lou asked, raising an eyebrow. He sounds like one of those artsy fellas. You sure he can handle a bunch of old war stories? Keanu laughed. Trust me, Lou Marcus is the real deal. He's also a veteran himself. He served in Iraq before getting into filmmaking. He understands what this is about. The veterans murmured in approval, and even Calvin gave a small nod. All right, he said. If he's one of us, I'll give him a shot. An unexpected arrival. Later that afternoon, as Keanu was helping Angela sort through a stack of old photos and letters in the common room, the front door opened, and a tall man with a rugged, salt-and-pepper beard stepped inside. He carried a camera bag slung over one shoulder and a look of quiet confidence. Marcus! Keanu exclaimed, standing up to greet him. Hey, man, Marcus replied, embracing Keanu in a quick, brotherly hug. Got your message last night. Took the first flight out this morning. Angela, who had been watching from a distance, approached with a look of amazement. You called him last night? How did he get here so fast? Keanu shrugged with a grin. When Marcus hears about a good story, he doesn't waste time. Marcus turned to the group, his gaze warm but serious. I've been working on documentaries for almost 10 years now, he said. But I've never had a chance to tell a story like this. I want to help you preserve your legacy, and I promise to do it right. Lou sized Marcus up with a critical eye before breaking into a grin. Well, you don't look too artsy after all. Welcome aboard, kid. The room filled with laughter as Marcus began unpacking his equipment, setting up cameras and microphones in the common area. The veterans gathered around, watching with fascination as he explained how everything worked. This isn't just about filming, Marcus said as he adjusted the lighting. It's about trust. If you've got something to say, I want to hear it, on camera or off. No pressure, no rush. Just honesty. Calvin, who had been sitting quietly in his usual spot by the window, spoke up. You're not here to make us look like charity cases, are you? Marcus met his gaze evenly. Not a chance, he said. You're heroes, plain and simple. And I'm here to make sure the world knows it. Calvin nodded, satisfied. All right then. Let's get to it. The first take. Marcus started filming that evening, beginning with short introductions from some of the veterans who had volunteered to go first. Ruby, with her sharp wit, immediately stole the show, recounting a story about sneaking extra supplies to wounded soldiers during the war. I wasn't supposed to take that morphine, she said with a wink, but rules don't mean much when someone's life is on the line. As the interviews continued, the atmosphere in Freedom House transformed. Veterans who had once kept their stories to themselves now spoke openly, their voices filled with pride and purpose. The younger staff members, many of whom had never heard these tales before, stood in awe, their respect for the residents growing with each passing moment. And Keanu? He was right in the thick of it, assisting Marcus with the filming, asking questions, and even helping to carry equipment between takes. Despite his fame, he was just another pair of hands on deck, a listener, a helper, a friend. What none of them knew was that the documentary would soon attract attention far beyond Freedom House, and that the next twist in the story was just around the corner. By the second day of filming, word of the project had started to spread within the local community. Angela, the nurse, had mentioned it casually to a few volunteers who worked at Freedom House, and they, in turn, told their friends and family. By the time Marcus finished his third interview, the home's front desk was flooded with phone calls. Angela, one of the staff members said, peeking into the common area, "The mayor's office just called. They heard about the documentary and want to know if they can help." Angela blinked in surprise. "The mayor?" "And that's not all," the staff member added, holding up a notepad filled with hastily scribbled messages. "A local radio station wants to interview someone from the project. Oh, and a reporter from the newspaper is asking if they can stop by tomorrow to do a feature." Angela turned to Keanu, who was helping Lou adjust a microphone. "Mr. Reeves, I think you've started something bigger than you realize." Keanu smiled modestly. "Good. The bigger this gets, the more people will hear their stories. Let's make it happen." A local surprise. Later that afternoon, as Marcus was finishing an interview with James, the Desert Storm veteran, the front door opened, and a man in a crisp suit walked in, carrying a small box. "Uh-oh," Lou muttered from his wheelchair. "Looks like we've got a big shot." Angela approached the man, who introduced himself as a representative from the mayor's office. "We heard about the incredible work you're doing here," he said, glancing around at the cameras and the group of veterans gathered in the common area. "The mayor asked me to deliver this." He handed Angela the box, which contained a plaque inscribed with the words, "To Freedom House, in honor of your courage, service, and legacy. The city of Atlanta thanks you." The veterans erupted into applause, and Angela, blinking back tears, held the plaque up for everyone to see. "This belongs to all of you," she said, her voice trembling. As the mayor's representative posed for a quick photo with the group, Keanu leaned over to Lou. "See? You're already famous," he joked. Lou grinned. "Well, it's about time." Marcus' big reveal. That evening, Marcus gathered the veterans and staff together for a brief announcement. "I've been reviewing the footage we've shot so far," he said, holding up his laptop, "and I've got to say, this is shaping up to be something really special. But I think we can take it to the next level." "What do you mean?" Ruby asked, eyeing him suspiciously. "You want us to start doing stunts?" The group laughed, and Marcus shook his head. "No stunts," he assured her. "But I do want to bring in some additional voices, family members, old friends, maybe even historians who can help put your stories in context. I think it'll make the project even more powerful." Calvin, who had been quiet for most of the day, raised a hand. "I've got someone you can call," he said. Marcus tilted his head. "Who's that?" "My daughter," Calvin replied. "She's an educator. Teaches African American history at the local college. She's always talking about how folks don't learn enough about what people like us went through. I think she'd like to be part of this." Keanu's face lit up. "That's perfect. Would you be okay with us reaching out to her?" Calvin nodded. "I'll call her myself. She's gonna love this." An unexpected call. While Calvin reached out to his daughter, Keanu slipped away to the staff office to make a few calls of his own. Pulling out his phone, He dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Keanu?" a voice answered on the third ring. "This is a surprise." "Hey, Ava," Keanu said, smiling despite himself. "It's been a while. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "For you." "Never," Ava replied warmly. "What's going on?" Keanu explained the project, describing the veterans at Freedom House and the stories they were sharing. "We're working on a documentary," he said, "but I want to make sure it gets the attention it deserves. I was wondering if you could help." Ava, a well-known producer who specialized in socially impactful films, didn't hesitate. "Of course," she said. "Send me what you've got, and I'll take a look. If it's as powerful as you say, I'll help you get it in front of the right people." Keanu sighed in relief. "Thank you, Ava. This means a lot." "Don't thank me yet," Ava replied. "Just make sure you're ready when this thing blows up. A story like this? People are going to care. A lot. The next generation steps in." The following morning, Calvin's daughter, Dr. Celeste Turner, arrived at Freedom House. She was a striking woman in her late 50s, with Calvin's sharp eyes and a warm, commanding presence. As soon as she walked into the common area, Calvin's face broke into a wide grin. "There's my girl," he said, pulling her into a hug. "I can't believe you didn't tell me about this sooner," Celeste teased, glancing around at the bustling activity. "This is amazing." Marcus introduced himself and explained how they hoped to incorporate her expertise into the project. "Your father told us you're a historian," he said. "We'd love to have your perspective." Celeste smiled. "I'd be honored. My students are always saying they want to hear more first-hand accounts. This documentary could be an incredible teaching tool." She spent the rest of the day interviewing veterans alongside Marcus, asking thoughtful questions that drew out even the quietest among them. When she spoke to Wally, the Korean War veteran who had shared his experiences with racism, she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder and said, "What you went through, it matters. And we're going to make sure people understand why." A chain reaction begins. As the days went on, the project gained momentum. Local businesses began donating supplies, from lighting equipment to fresh meals for the veterans. A nearby high school offered its auditorium as a screening venue for the finished documentary. Even the mayor promised to attend the premiere. Keanu, watching it all unfold, felt a deep sense of gratitude. This wasn't just a project anymore, it was a movement. And yet, as he stood in the middle of the bustling common area, he couldn't shake the feeling that something even bigger was on the horizon. He was right. Because in just a few days, Freedom House was about to receive a visitor who would change everything. The buzz surrounding the documentary had reached far beyond Atlanta, sparking interest across social media and even catching the attention of national organizations. Keanu's phone was ringing non-stop, and Marcus had started fielding emails from journalists, educators, and even museum curators who wanted to support the project. But no one could have predicted what happened on the fourth day of filming. It began as a quiet morning at Freedom House. Marcus was setting up for an interview with Ruby, who insisted on wearing her best scarf for the camera, while Lou was teaching Elijah how to shuffle a deck of cards with the precision of a magician. Keanu, in his usual unassuming way, was carrying equipment and helping Angela set up coffee for the veterans. Then the phone at the front desk rang. One of the staff members answered, her eyes widening as the voice on the other end introduced themselves. Wait, can you repeat that?" she stammered, glancing nervously toward Angela. Angela, noticing her expression, walked over. "What's going on?" The staff member covered the phone's receiver with her hand. "It's someone from the White House," she whispered. They're saying the First Lady wants to visit." Angela froze. The First Lady? By now, the veterans had noticed something was up. Lou wheeled himself closer. "What's all the whispering about?" he asked suspiciously. "You planning a surprise party without me?" Angela, still in shock, quickly explained. It's not a party, Lou. It's the First Lady. She heard about the documentary, and she wants to come here and meet everyone. The room fell silent for a moment, then erupted into a flurry of questions and excitement. The First Lady? Coming here? Do we need to dress up? Lou, you better polish those medals of yours. Keanu, standing in the corner with a faint smile, raised his hand to get everyone's attention. All right, he said. Let's not panic. If she's coming, it's because she wants to meet you, just the way you are. No need for a fashion show. Lou grinned. Speak for yourself, Hollywood. I'm digging out my best suit. A day to remember. 2 days later, Freedom House was abuzz with anticipation. The veterans sat in the common area, their uniforms and medals proudly displayed, while staff members made sure everything was spotless. Even Elijah had dressed up, wearing a crisp button-down shirt and a pair of shoes that looked a little too big for his feet. When the motorcade pulled up outside, a hush fell over the room. The veterans watched in awe as the First Lady stepped out, her warm smile and elegant demeanor instantly putting everyone at ease. She was accompanied by a small team of aides and security personnel, but her attention was fully on the people waiting to meet her. Hello, everyone, she said as she entered the room, her voice filled with genuine warmth. Thank you for welcoming me to your home. The veterans stood to greet her, their pride and excitement evident. Lou, ever the charmer, extended his hand. Ma'am, he said with a wink, it's not every day we get royalty around here. The First Lady laughed, shaking his hand warmly. The honor's all mine, she said. I've heard so much about this place, and the incredible people who live here. She spent the next hour meeting each veteran personally, asking thoughtful questions and listening intently to their stories. When she spoke to Calvin, he told her about his time marching with Dr. King. It's an honor to meet you, he said, his voice filled with emotion. But I've got to ask, what made you want to visit us? The First Lady smiled. I believe stories like yours are the foundation of our country, she said. When I heard about what you're doing here, preserving these legacies, I knew I had to come and see it for myself. And let me just say, you're an inspiration to all of us. A special request. As the visit progressed, Marcus couldn't resist capturing the moments on film, with the First Lady's permission, of course. She even took a few minutes to sit down for an interview, speaking about the importance of honoring veterans and preserving history. I want to support this project in any way I can, she said. And I think it's something the whole country needs to see. Later, as her visit was winding down, she pulled Keanu aside for a private conversation. Mr. Reeves, she began, I can't thank you enough for what you're doing here. This isn't just a documentary, it's a movement. And I want to help make sure it reaches as many people as possible. Keanu, ever humble, nodded. Thank you, ma'am. That means a lot coming from you. But honestly, this is their project. I'm just here to help tell their stories. Well, she said with a smile, I think it's time the nation hears those stories loud and clear. What would you think about screening the documentary at the White House when it's finished? Keanu blinked, momentarily speechless. The White House? She nodded. We could invite leaders, educators, and historians from across the country. Use it as a platform to spark a bigger conversation about honoring our veterans and their contributions to history. Keanu smiled, his mind already racing with possibilities. That would be incredible. Thank you. The First Lady placed a hand on his shoulder. No, thank you, for reminding us what true heroism looks like. The ripple effect. After the First Lady's visit, the project gained national attention. News outlets began running stories about Freedom House, the veterans, and their incredible histories. Social media lit up with posts about the documentary, with hashtags like #FreedomHouseHeroes and #HonorTheirStories trending nationwide. Donations poured in from across the country, ensuring that the home had the resources it needed to support its residents for years to come. Schools reached out, asking if they could incorporate the veteran stories into their history lessons. And Marcus? He was already editing the first few segments of the documentary, determined to make it the best work of his career. But amidst all the excitement, Keanu remained focused on the veterans themselves. Each day, he continued to sit with them, listen to their stories, and remind them of how much they mattered. One evening, as the group gathered around the dining table for dinner, Calvin leaned over to Keanu and said, "You know, I wasn't sure about you at first." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? What changed your mind?" Calvin chuckled. "You stayed. Most people, they show up, make a lot of noise, and then leave. But you stayed. That means something." Keanu smiled, his voice quiet but firm. "You stayed for this country, Calvin. This is the least I can do." As the veterans nodded in agreement, Keanu couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning. The stories of Freedom House were about to change the world, and he was honored to be part of it. With the First Lady's promise to host a White House screening and the flood of national attention pouring into Freedom House, the stakes for the documentary had never been higher. Marcus worked tirelessly, spending long hours editing footage, reviewing interviews, and weaving together a narrative that would honor the veterans' lives while resonating with audiences across generations. Keanu, meanwhile, had taken on a role he never expected, coordinating logistics, rallying resources, and acting as a bridge between Hollywood and the grassroots efforts at Freedom House. Calls from producers, actors, and philanthropists came pouring in, each offering support. Some wanted to sponsor the project, while others wanted to help with distribution. But through it all, Keanu remained focused on one thing, staying true to the veteran stories. The first screening. After 2 weeks of tireless work, Marcus had completed the first cut of the documentary, a powerful, 40-minute film that highlighted the veteran stories, the sacrifices they'd made, and the legacy they were leaving behind. "All right, folks," Marcus said one evening, gathering the veterans and staff in the common room. "You've been patient long enough. It's time for you to see what we've been working on." The staff had transformed the room into a makeshift theater, complete with a projector and a popcorn machine borrowed from a local community center. The veterans took their seats, some of them nervously adjusting their ties and jackets as if they were about to walk a red carpet. Keanu stood by the door, watching as Marcus dimmed the lights and hit play. The room fell silent as the film began, the opening sequence featuring a black-and-white montage of old photographs, intercut with footage of the veterans today. One by one, their stories unfolded on the screen, Ruby recounting her time as a nurse in World War II, Lou telling his tales with his signature humor, Wally speaking softly but powerfully about the battles he'd fought both overseas and at home. Calvin's voice rang out like a heartbeat through the film, his words bridging the past and present with the wisdom only a life well lived could offer. When the documentary ended, the room remained silent for a moment. Then, as if on cue, the veterans broke into applause. Ruby wiped a tear from her eye, Lou let out a loud whoop of approval, and Calvin simply sat back in his chair, a satisfied smile on his face. "You did us proud," Calvin said to Marcus, his voice steady. Marcus nodded, visibly moved. "It was an honor." Keanu, standing near the back of the room, clapped a hand on Marcus' shoulder. "You captured their souls," he said. "This is going to change lives." A flood of support. The documentary was sent to the First Lady, who kept her promise to make the White House screening happen. But before that day arrived, Marcus decided to release a short trailer online, just to build some buzz. Within hours, the trailer went viral. It was shared by veterans groups, civil rights organizations, and celebrities across social media. People from all over the world flooded the comments section with messages of gratitude, sharing stories of their own family members who had served. One message, however, stood out among the rest. It was from a man named Henry, who wrote, "My grandfather was a Freedom House resident. He passed away last year, but I never knew all the things he went through until I saw this trailer. Thank you for helping me understand the man he was. I feel like I can finally honor him the way he deserved." When Keanu read the message aloud to the group, the room fell silent. Lou was the first to speak. "You hear that, folks? We're not just telling stories, we're bringing families back together. A Hollywood connection." In the midst of the growing buzz, Ava, the producer Keanu had called earlier, reached out with big news. "I've got a distribution deal for you," she said during a video call. "Netflix is interested in picking up the documentary. They want to stream it globally." Keanu raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Netflix?" Ava nodded. "They think it could be a major hit. And honestly, so do I. But before we move forward, I need to know if this is what you want. Once it's out there, it's going to be seen by millions of people. Are the veterans okay with that?" Keanu turned to Marcus, who had been listening on the call. "What do you think?" "I think it's up to them," Marcus said. The next day, Keanu and Marcus held a meeting with the veterans to discuss the offer. Calvin, as always, was the first to speak. "Millions of people, huh?" he said, scratching his chin. "That's a lot of eyes." "It is," Keanu admitted. "And we won't do anything you're not comfortable with. This is your story, we're just helping to tell it." The room fell quiet as the veterans considered the proposal. Finally, Ruby spoke up. "If it means more people will understand what we went through," she said, "then I say do it. Let the world see us." One by one, the others nodded in agreement. Lou, ever the joker, added, "Just make sure they spell my name right in the credits." The White House premiere. The day of the White House screening arrived, and it felt like something out of a dream. The veterans were flown to Washington, D.C., courtesy of donations from supporters, and they arrived in style, dressed in their finest clothes and greeted by a standing ovation from dignitaries, educators, and military leaders. As they entered the East Room, where the screening would take place, Keanu walked beside Calvin, who looked around in awe. "Never thought I'd end up here," Calvin said quietly. "You earned it," Keanu replied. The First Lady greeted the veterans personally, thanking each of them for their service and their willingness to share their stories. When the lights dimmed and the documentary began, Keanu found himself holding his breath, waiting to see how the audience would respond. By the time the film ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The applause was thunderous, echoing through the historic walls of the White House. One general stood and saluted the veterans, a gesture that brought tears to even the most stoic faces. Calvin turned to Keanu, his voice quiet but full of emotion. "You know," he said, "I wasn't sure about you at first. But you've done good, son. Real good." Keanu smiled, his own eyes glistening. "It was all of you. I just listened. A legacy that lasts." In the weeks that followed, the documentary became a cultural phenomenon. Schools across the country used it as a teaching tool, and veterans organizations hosted screenings to spark discussions about history, service, and sacrifice. As for Freedom House, it became a symbol of resilience and hope. Donations continued to pour in, ensuring that the home would remain a safe haven for generations to come. And for Keanu? He returned to his life in Hollywood, but he carried the experience with him, a reminder of the power of stories to change the world. One day, he received a letter from Elijah. It was short but heartfelt. "Thank you for helping my great-grandpa share his story. You didn't just change his life, you changed mine, too. I want to be just like him when I grow up. Your friend, Elijah." Keanu folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his bag. It was a reminder of why he'd answered Elijah's first letter in the first place, and proof that even the smallest acts of kindness could create ripples that reached farther than anyone could imagine. The success of the Freedom House documentary had gone far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The film, now streaming globally on Netflix under the title Freedom House, Stories of Courage, became an instant hit, sparking discussions in classrooms, community centers, and even international forums. Its poignant tagline, "Every story deserves to be told," resonated deeply with viewers. But the veterans' impact wasn't limited to the screen. Inspired by the documentary, veterans organizations around the country began creating their own oral history projects. Schools formed partnerships with local retirement homes, encouraging students to interview older generations and preserve their stories. Museums added new exhibits, and libraries began hosting events to honor the unsung heroes of history. And at the heart of it all was Freedom House, a once modest home that had become a symbol of resilience and hope. The veterans there were receiving letters and visitors from people all over the world, strangers who wanted to thank them, learn from them, or simply shake their hands. A national award. One afternoon, a letter arrived at Freedom House. Angela, now acting as the home's unofficial public relations manager, opened it in front of the veterans. "Oh, my goodness," she said, her hand flying to her mouth. "What is it?" Ruby asked, leaning forward eagerly. Angela smiled broadly. "It's from the President of the United States. He's inviting us to Washington again, this time for the National Medal of Freedom ceremony. He wants to honor Freedom House for its contributions to preserving history and inspiring the nation." The room erupted into cheers. Lou, as always, found a way to lighten the mood. "Well, looks like I need to buy another suit," he quipped. "Can't be wearing the same thing twice when the president's involved." Keanu, who had flown back to Atlanta for a visit, grinned. "I think you'll manage, Lou." Calvin, sitting quietly by the window, shook his head in disbelief. "All this," he said softly, "because of a little home nobody thought twice about." Keanu turned to him, his expression serious. "Because of you. Because you had the courage to speak up, to share your truth. That's what made this happen." Elijah's next steps. While preparations for the medal ceremony were underway, Elijah approached Keanu with a nervous but excited expression. "Mr. Reeves, can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked. "Of course," Keanu replied, crouching down to meet him at eye level. "What's on your mind?" Elijah held up a folder filled with papers. "I've been working on something," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "It's a project for school. We're supposed to write about someone we admire, and I chose my great-grandpa. But I think it's more than just a school project now." Keanu flipped through the folder, reading the carefully written pages. It was a beautifully detailed account of Calvin's life, his childhood, his military service, his work in the civil rights movement, and his role in the Freedom House documentary. Elijah had even included photos and handwritten quotes from his great-grandpa. "This is incredible," Keanu said, genuinely impressed. "You did all of this yourself?" Elijah nodded. "Yeah. But I don't want to stop here. I want to write a book about him, and about everyone at Freedom House. Do you think I could do that?" Keanu placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "I think you can do anything you set your mind to. And if you need help, I'll be there every step of the way." Elijah beamed. "Thanks, Mr. Reeves. I'm going to make him proud." "You already have," Keanu said, glancing over at Calvin, who was watching them with a quiet smile. The medal ceremony. The day of the National Medal of Freedom ceremony was one of celebration and gratitude. The veterans of Freedom House arrived in Washington to a hero's welcome, greeted by a cheering crowd and a military band playing patriotic songs. For many of them, it was a moment they never expected to experience, a moment of true recognition for a lifetime of service and sacrifice. During the ceremony, the president spoke directly to the veterans. "The men and women of Freedom House remind us of the incredible courage and resilience that defines our nation," he said. "Through their stories, they have given us a priceless gift, a deeper understanding of our history, and a renewed sense of hope for our future." When the medal was presented, Calvin stepped forward to accept it on behalf of the group. His hands trembled slightly as he held the medal, but his voice was strong as he addressed the crowd. "This isn't just for us," he said. "It's for everyone who served, everyone who sacrificed, and everyone who's still fighting to make this country a better place. We didn't do what we did for medals or recognition. We did it because it was the right thing to do. And we hope that, by sharing our stories, we can inspire others to stand up for what's right, no matter how hard it might be." The crowd gave him a standing ovation, and as Calvin returned to his seat, Keanu reached over to shake his hand. "That was beautiful," he said. "Just speaking the truth," Calvin replied. A quiet moment. Later that evening, after the excitement of the ceremony had died down, Keanu and Calvin sat together on a bench outside the hotel. The city lights sparkled in the distance, and the air was filled with the soft hum of traffic. "You've done a lot for us, Keanu," Calvin said, breaking the silence. "I hope you know how much it means." Keanu shook his head. "You've given me more than I could ever give you. You reminded me why stories matter, why it's so important to listen, to learn, to connect. This whole experience has changed me." Calvin chuckled. "Well, don't go getting too sentimental on me. You've still got movies to make." Keanu laughed, leaning back against the bench. "Fair enough. But I think this project will always be the one I'm proudest of." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two men from different worlds brought together by a shared purpose. And in that moment, Keanu realized something profound: Freedom House wasn't just a place. It was a legacy, a reminder that every life, no matter how quiet or overlooked, has the power to change the world. A few weeks after the Medal of Freedom ceremony, life at Freedom House had settled back into a comfortable rhythm. The veterans, now unofficial celebrities, were still receiving letters and visitors, but they never let the attention distract them from their daily routines. Keanu, though busy with upcoming film projects, made it a point to return one last time before the documentary's wide release. He wanted to sit with the veterans, to thank them, and to share some exciting news. Freedom House, Stories of Courage had been nominated for an Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature. The announcement was met with cheers and laughter, with Lou joking, "Hollywood, you better bring us that shiny statue, or don't bother coming back." Keanu smiled but turned serious as he approached Calvin, who sat by the window, gazing out at the trees swaying gently in the breeze. "You've had a big year, Calvin," Keanu said, pulling up a chair. "What's next for you?" Calvin chuckled softly, his hands resting on his cane. "Next? Oh, I think I've done enough, son. I've marched, I've fought, I've told my story. Now it's time for the younger ones, like Elijah, to carry the torch." Keanu nodded. "He's already working on that book about you." "That boy's got a spark," Calvin said with pride. "But I do have one last wish, if you're asking." Keanu leaned in, listening intently. "Anything." "What is it?" Calvin turned, his eyes bright with wisdom and warmth. "Promise me you won't stop listening, Keanu. To stories, to people, to the quiet voices that most folks overlook. That's what the world needs, more people who truly listen." Keanu sat back, letting the words sink in. Finally, he nodded. "I promise." The two men sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the world go by. And in that quiet moment, Keanu realized that Calvin's final wish wasn't just for him, it was for everyone. A promise to carry forward the stories of the past, so they'd never be forgotten. The night of the Academy Awards arrived, and the veterans of Freedom House gathered in the common room to watch the ceremony on a large TV that Angela had set up. They laughed and joked, sharing bowls of popcorn as they waited for the big moment. Elijah sat next to Calvin, fidgeting with excitement. On screen, Keanu appeared, dressed in a sleek black tuxedo. He had been asked to present the category for Best Documentary Feature, and as he stood at the podium, he spoke directly from the heart. "This year's nominees represent the power of storytelling," Keanu began, "and how the voices of ordinary people can create extraordinary change. One of those stories came from a place called Freedom House, where a group of veterans reminded us that courage doesn't fade with age, it grows deeper. It's been my honor to be part of their journey. When Freedom House, Stories of Courage was announced as the winner, the common room erupted into cheers. Lou shouted, "We did it," while Ruby dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Though Keanu accepted the award on stage, he made sure the world knew who the true stars were. "This isn't my award," he said, holding the golden statue high. "This belongs to the heroes of Freedom House. This is their legacy." Back at Freedom House, Calvin leaned back in his chair, watching the applause on TV. "You know," he said quietly, "I think we've done some good here." Elijah grinned. "Not just some, Grandpa. A lot." The boy held up his notebook, now filled with even more stories and memories, and Calvin placed a proud hand on his shoulder. "Then I guess it's time to pass the baton," Calvin said. And just like that, a legacy that began with the quiet voices of forgotten heroes was carried forward by the next generation, proving that even the smallest stories can leave the biggest mark.